When I first saw the Heartland model of Book of Mormon geography several years ago, I didn't really see any merit in it, so I've been surprised that it's still being discussed, and that sometimes hotly. Since it's come up again recently, I thought I'd illustrate a few of the objections that seemed most compelling to me. The Heartland model is built around two geographical points that Rodney Meldrum believes are a matter of revelation, the hill Cumorah and the city Zarahemla. The hill Cumorah. It's not known exactly when members of the church first began calling the hill where the plates were buried Cumorah, but by the time Joseph wrote the phrase, "glad tidings from Cumorah," in a letter that became section 128, the use of that name was well established among the saints. But that was 13 years later. It's abundantly clear from the Book of Mormon itself that the New York Hill cannot be Cumorah. For one thing, it's explicit that all the Nephite records were buried there, except the abridgment Mormon gave to his son Moroni, the plates that would become the Book of Mormon. Furthermore, the hill is much too small to have been the scene of a battle involving as much as 500,000 casualties, and the small band of Nephite survivors would have had no place to hide on that little drumlin. Zarahemla. Latter-day Saints established a settlement on the Mississippi opposite Nauvoo and began calling it Zarahemla. It was mentioned several years later in section 125. Journals from the time make it clear that nobody supposed that the Lord, or even Joseph Smith, was responsible for the specific name of the place, or that it really was the site of the ancient city of Zarahemla. Indeed, about a year later, Joseph Smith speculated on a location for Zarahemla in Guatemala, as we'll discuss later. Starting with these 2 points as a matter of settled revelation, Meldrum constructs a geography that doesn't even align in any meaningful way with the text of the Book of Mormon. I'll mention just a few of the most glaring deficiencies. In the Book of Mormon, the lands of Nephi and Zarahemla are nearly surrounded by water. But in Heartland, the seas east, west, north, and south, the Great Lakes, are nowhere near those lands, let alone surrounding them. Oddly, the West Sea is actually east of Zarahemla instead of west. In the Book of Mormon, the land of Nephi stretches from the East Sea to the west. In Heartland, it obviously does not. In the Book of Mormon, Bountiful is north of Zarahemla. In Heartland, it is east. The location of the land of first inheritance, which in the Book of Mormon is on the West Sea, is somehow on an otherwise unnamed sea far to the south. The river Sidon flows from south to north in the Book of Mormon, not the opposite. Its headwaters are in the narrow strip of wilderness between the land of Nephi and Zarahemla, but Heartland somehow makes this the confluence of two already massive rivers, the Mississippi and Ohio. Alma chapter 2 has troops wading across the Sidon River in the ebb and flow of battle. Imagine trying that in the Mississippi. Furthermore, the Sidon flows into the seas that surround Zarahemla, not away from them. Careful attention to the text of the Book of Mormon makes it plain that the whole narrative cannot have occurred in an area more than about 400 miles north to south and a few hundred miles east to west. But Heartland would have Limhi's rescue expedition traveling 1,700 miles in the wrong direction to reach the land of desolation. To try and make the model work, Heartland creates a narrow pass separate from the narrow neck, even though the text shows that the pass is within the neck. Neither of these proposed features are south of the proposed Cumorah as required by the text, and indeed, the whole reason why the Nephites occupied the land Bountiful from the east to the sea west was to prevent the Lamanites from gaining access to the north countries through that narrow neck. Such statements are pointless in Heartland, because nothing would prevent the Lamanites from going around either east or west. It's unimaginable that with all the troop movements and migrations that they recount, the Book of Mormon authors would never once have mentioned ice, snow, or even cold if the setting were the area around the Great Lakes. It is a further problem how populations of millions of Jarenites would have survived in what is now Ontario. The destructions of 3rd Nephi match quite precisely with, and many would say require, a very specific geological setting, a volcano on or near a strike-slip fault line. There are no such arrangements anywhere in North America east of the Rockies, much less in Heartland. The following is a list of important findings missing from the archaeological record in the area proposed in Heartland. These would not, in and of themselves, be damning for the model. When the Book of Mormon was first published, they were lacking anywhere. But now, all these things are known to be present in Mesoamerica, where there are also stunning geographical and geological correlations for the Nephite scripture. In light of that, each of these must be considered as significant deficiencies for the model. Population. The Heartland held populations that were nowhere near those recorded in the Book of Mormon. Intensive agriculture. This would be required for large populations, but there's very limited agriculture evident in the Heartland. Multiple grains. Only maize is known from the Heartland versus barley and others in Mesoamerica. Animal husbandry. No evidence in Heartland. Cities. None in the Heartland of Book of Mormon times, much less cities of cement. Buildings, towers, highways. None in Heartland before 400 A.D. Large-scale warfare, swords, scimitars, and shields. None in Heartland. Large-scale defensive structures. None. Literacy, including books and multiple scripts, completely absent in Heartland. The samples cited in Heartland are known hoaxes. Multiple calendars that ran intercurrently. No calendars at all in Heartland. Metallurgy. None in Heartland in Book of Mormon times. Meldrum incorrectly but persistently and emphatically uses the phrase, Joseph knew. That is, Joseph Smith knew the specific location of Book of Mormon events by revelation. The facts, however, show that the prophet's views on the subject evolved over time. The Plains of the Nephites. In 1834, during the March of Zion's camp, Joseph wrote to Emma and described the company as wandering over the plains of the Nephites. Yet the name Plains of the Nephites doesn't occur in the Book of Mormon. Zelph. During that same march, the party found a human skeleton buried in a mound with an arrow point in his ribcage. Though accounts were mutually contradictory, Joseph reportedly said that the bones belonged to a Lamanite. Yet this character, Zelph, and the chief he followed are nowhere mentioned in the Book of Mormon text. Most people have concluded from this that he lived a long time after the Book of Mormon ended and died in a battle between Lamanite tribes. Certainly many other times, Joseph and even the Lord in Revelations referred to the Indian tribes of the regions where he lived as Lamanites. The Nephite altar. In 1838, Joseph and others were exploring Daviess County, Missouri, for possible settlement sites for the saints, and discovered what he reportedly believed was a Nephitish altar. All of these incidents are taken by Heartland supporters as evidence that Joseph knew by revelation the location of Book of Mormon lands. But then, in 1842, Joseph read a newly published book detailing explorations in Mesoamerica, with depictions and illustrations of many great ruined cities and monuments covered in hieroglyphics and so forth. He was electrified. As editor of the Times and Seasons, he promoted the contents of the book by publishing lengthy extracts in the paper, and he expressed his own opinion that Zarahemla was situated in Mesoamerica. He, or John Taylor under his direction, wrote in one of several editorials, "We are not going to declare positively that the ruins of Quirigua are those of Zarahemla, but when the land and the stones and the books tell the story so plain, we are of the opinion that it would require more proof than the Jews could bring to prove the disciples stole the body of Jesus from the tomb, to prove that the ruins of the city in question are not those referred to in the Book of Mormon." Clearly, Nephite geography was not a settled matter in the prophet's mind, and of course the church today continues to maintain that there has never been a revelation on the subject. So how could Joseph Smith's statements about the plains of the Nephites, Zelph, the Nephite altar, and the Indian tribes in the region being Lamanites, how could all that mesh with the Mesoamerican setting for the Book of Mormon that he came to favor? It's been suggested by LDS archaeologists that there may really have been Nephite and Lamanite influence across North America, but that all that was outside the scope of the Book of Mormon itself, that is, in the hinterland, not the homeland, of the Nephite and Lamanite civilization. First of all, there does appear to be strong and long-lasting influence from Mesoamerica throughout North America before, during, and after Book of Mormon times. The extinct Ohio Hopewell share many genetic markers with Mesoamerican tribes. The influence of Mesoamerican languages reaches from the Cherokee in the east to the Utes and Hopi in the west. Shared cultural traits, such as specific sacrificial rites, ball games, sweat baths, as well as architectural styles, trade goods, and many other factors, paint a clear picture of sustained contact between Mesoamerica and North America. And the Book of Mormon describes a scenario for Nephite participation in this contact. In Alma chapter 63, 5,400 men, together with their wives and children, so perhaps more than 20,000 people altogether, went northward to escape the perpetual conflict between the Nephites and Lamanites. Other migrations followed in the subsequent years, and this may have continued throughout Nephite history, as when Nephi and Lehi, the sons of Helaman, went into the land northward to preach to the people there. Importantly, we know nothing of those people, except that they rejected this preaching. These northern colonies simply don't figure in the Book of Mormon, which can only really focus on the main body of the Nephites in their homeland. And even what we have in the Nephite homeland, of course, is only the 100th part. This shouldn't be too surprising to us. Several years ago, I took some of my kids on vacation to see Waterton Lakes National Park in Alberta, Canada. In exploring towns in the vicinity, we were amazed to see LDS chapels everywhere, only they were flying the maple leaf instead of the stars and stripes. The Mormon hinterland colonies in Canada, and for that matter in Mexico, are hardly known at all in the church. But are we justified in calling Native North Americans, Lamanites, as Joseph did? We certainly are. It's a genealogical fact that if a person that lived as long ago as Lehi did has any living descendants today at all, then all the people on the continent are his descendants. After 2,600 years, there would certainly have been enough intermixing through migration, trade, war captives, and so forth, that the chances of a Native American not being a descendant of Lehi are impossibly remote. Meldrum makes much of the supposed DNA evidence tying Native American tribes in the Great Lake regions, exclusively, to the Middle East. This evidence rests on the occurrence of a mitochondrial DNA marker called haplotype X2A among Algonquian-speaking tribes. That mitochondrial DNA marker is thought to originate in the Middle East. It sounds like that should be evidence for a genetic relationship between Native Americans and Jews, which would support the Book of Mormon story of migration from Jerusalem. However, even LDS geneticists agree with the best current evidence that suggests that connection goes back not to 600 BC when Lehi's party arrived, but 12,000 years ago with the appearance of the Clovis culture. Meldrum does not believe that the Earth's history goes back more than 6,000 years, so he does not accept that timeline. DNA evidence for the Book of Mormon is unnecessarily controversial. Mormon and non-Mormon experts in population genetics both agree that the likelihood of finding the genetic signature of a small group of outsiders that had entered an established native population 2 millennia later is so impossibly remote as to not even be worth attempting. And that's assuming that we could somehow even have Lehi's DNA to work with. There's ample evidence in the Book of Mormon text itself that both Nephites and Lamanites joined with others already in the New World again and again throughout their history. Their specific genetic markers would have long since been washed out and undetectable. So, while it might be tempting to accept the haplotype X connection as buttressing the Book of Mormon's claims, no matter which geographical model one prefers, we shouldn't. The Book of Mormon promised that Zion, the New Jerusalem, would someday be built on this land. And D&C 84 1-4 instructs that this should start in Jackson County, Missouri. Meldrum concludes from these and other references that the promises in the Book of Mormon pertain to the United States alone and no other nation. This seems rather awkward because Heartland situates the Jaredites in Canada, and the whole Southwest, including Texas, California, and importantly Utah, in Mexican territory at the time the Book of Mormon was published. Are all those areas excluded from the promises of the Book of Mormon? The real problem, of course, is that the prophet taught dozens of times that all those promises applied to all of North and South America. For example, this from July 19, 1840. Speaking of the land of Zion, it consists of all North and South America. The redemption of Zion is the redemption of all North and South America. Add to this the problem of the prophecy of the arrival of Columbus. That explorer never went near what would become the U.S. Indeed, he never so much as reached Mexico. This jingoistic U.S.-only idea is simply untenable. I think that all the foregoing is sufficient to put the Heartland model of Book of Mormon geography to rest. However, I feel it's important to reluctantly mention some worries that I have that are not directly related to the specifics of the model that Meldrum proposes. They have to do with the way he promotes his ideas. Meldrum uses the language of revelation to describe how he arrived at his conclusions, as well as how he governs his organization. All of these quotes are from a letter he sent to his supporters in 2008. The Lord provided the answer. The Lord provided another miracle. The Lord is watching out for this project. He does more than imply that God endorses his work. The tone of his products is very religious. He speaks of converting members of the church to his views. Those that support him are spiritually superior. His work is a matter of salvation. So this is not an academic matter to him. It's a call to repentance. These passages are especially revealing and disturbing. Here he cites a blessing by a popular former general authority and implies that there were aspects of the blessing too sacred to share. He then implies that the church is out of the way, that the saints need to be emboldened by his views to declare the truth anew. He repeatedly says that those with contrary ideas disdain and disparage the prophet Joseph and aid the enemies of the church. I worry that his rhetoric encourages people to have a testimony of his ideas, whereas members' testimony should not be tied to any idea that the church has repeatedly and equivocally said is irrelevant to salvation. Meldrum apparently makes all of his income from promoting his geographical model, tours, books, DVDs, lectures. I've seen some of his promotions, and the salesman-like pressure for people to donate bothers me. If this is an academic issue, the facts should speak for themselves. If it's a religious issue, the continuous appeals for money taint the dialogue and smack of priestcraft. Meldrum got Elder Hartman Rector Jr., now an emeritus general authority, to endorse his products, and this seems to imply that the church endorses his work, which it doesn't. I note that poor Elder Rector was recently the victim of another scam, a Ponzi scheme, by an unscrupulous businessman trying to use his notoriety to lure other Latter-day Saints into his investment scam. Again, all these items don't really reflect one way or another upon the actual theory of Heartland geography, but they definitely muddy the waters of an already contentious issue. In short, Rodney Meldrum's Heartland model of Book of Mormon geography makes for both bad science and bad religion.